on campus.
Yeah. Good connection. Okay. They're getting re-invited. This is about that.
It out. Small companies, these reports would start as soon as the stage manager is present.
Matthew?
Okay, I don't know what happened.
Matthew?
Yeah.
The connection's really bad. I haven't heard very much, and that's why everyone left, because we can't hear anything. It freezes every other word.
Okay. Okay. Your mics, you're not talking.
You're frozen right now. I can't hear anything.
Be sure.
No, not really. Oh. For the gym, yeah. And, you know, that's what we did. Oh. Before so the June, so them became both concerts, concert and cohort in January. And you could just do the same photo from our June concert. That'll be the main image. Okay. And then an additional.
Taylor, I don't. Right. Yeah. You got my email?
Yeah. Yeah, I know we received an email way back when.
Taylor, can you hear me at all?
Right now I can. The audio goes in and out, and then the screen is just frozen.
Okay. So why don't you guys just stop watching? Hopefully it's recording properly. It's just not properly. I'll send you my notes. And did you get my email?
It's not coming.
But I just.
But I'll look for it.
Okay. Can you look for it now? Because I sent it to you.
I'm trying to load it right now.
Everybody else to your benefit.
I haven't gotten anything.
You haven't gotten anything.
No, it's loading. Oh wait, here it goes. Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, let's look for the notes.
Hopefully, okay.
All right.
You guys have this problem with design methodologies? You
different reasons.
The school might have like a corporate.
Yeah, troubleshooted now. You've never had a problem. Oh, you watch later. I will say it's fine, but yes, you would go in and out of movement.
I wonder if
And then
that,
I also noticed that in Felicia, like their screens were, as I could see them down below.
Uh-huh.
Their screens were like they were frozen in one.
well, I'll try to, I'm wondering why the person who set me up with this didn't tell me.
LVMA as well.
It's-
Working and they switched, Elizabeth switched to Zoom and it's fine now.
Okay,
So that's my suggestion.
okay, thank you. I will try to get that set up over the weekend. Okay. Back to recently this thing of the video being inconsistent. I'm going to be able to publish a book about stage management.
Totally. Exciting.
Okay, so I think that's pretty clear. I just wanted you to add that note, particularly about costumes, because it's often forgotten, because it's not actually about the costume, it's about the movement of the performers.
And
Okay.
also well, I guess as you're getting closer, would you make costume notes there if someone has a quick change and for instance, their costume needs to be on side stage ready for them?
Absolutely.
to change into?
Yeah. So yeah, the more complicated it gets, the more people you need. So like with Three Sisters has been in rehearsal for 3 weeks. They already have 4 stage managers working.
Wow.
The producer is just when people go off book, somebody who's just tracking props, and somebody who's tracking everything and preparing what would go on the rehearsal report, and taking line notes, which is something completely unrelated to dance, and then the stage manager managing everything.
Wow.
So yeah.
So nice, all those hands.
Yeah, yeah. We have a really great setup in the theater program. We always have about 20 students per semester who take crew.
Wow.
When they get their, because we offer a degree in it, in
Wow.
technical theater and design on the undergraduate level. Yeah. And stage management has always been a big thing here. Linda being one of the main leaders in that department. Okay. I wanted to end this conversation about rehearsals with this interesting anecdote, and you can take or leave it. Somebody want to read it? Someone? Okay. This is from a stage manager.
Its headquarters in South Kensington this winter. I watched Daria and Bunny again. So I mean, Russian last names. They're a cracker. Although any were clearly resolved by United adjustments. Raised and instead stretched, might be finessed. Tried Eagling, who had the doorway, was drawn into the discussion. And here's the interesting thing. The only people who weren't asked for an opinion were the dancers themselves. Dar is one of the company's most experienced ballerinas, and the elegant young Vadim is being groomed for stardom.
That's probably all we need to read. And I realized that was actually written by a reporter who was invited to rehearsal, but it's such a good example of being inclusive, using the dancers and involving them when they should be involved. So I just thought it was a little something interesting that came off of the Stage Management Network.
I feel like we could add that. You mentioned qualities. Collaboration. I think collaboration. We talked about asking others to help kind of be there, but feel separate.
Yeah. There is another part as a stage manager of the choreographer aware of inclusivity, diversity issues, people using improper language. I think you know what I'm talking about. People being addressed in the proper pronoun, all of that stuff. It's, you know, it's become a much bigger thing, and for a really good reason.
It's actually on my audition form. In there, not just their name, but a preferred pronoun.
Yeah.
I love that this is coming up because this is like this. Just being here in San Francisco, my whole world has opened up to like how important this is.
Yeah.
In the South, that conversation is not happening.
Okay.
What was the other word that you used about this?
Diversity.
Diversity.
Yeah. But I think also this is specifically about including the dancers so that the dancers are part of the process. And, you know, I think most choreographers do this. I mean, they want to know what the dancers are thinking. So I wanted to also talk about keeping the cast on time and dealing with lateness and has in rehearsal. Some of this we've talked about, but it's good to remind you, is that you are setting the example as stage manager, so you should behave as you want other people to behave. Rehearsal should not stop when a performer shows up late. If somebody shows up late, probably best for you privately to tell them to get into their rehearsal clothes and go warm up privately. If the late performer prevents you from rehearsing a scheduled section, you need to be able to quickly move on to another section of the dance that isn't so reliant on that dancer. At the with the late performer, and usually this is in this particular way. First of all, was the dancer clear on when they were called? If you're a student, you'll lie about that one. Ask them why they were late in the, you know, politest way they can. How can you help them prevent that problem in the future? So why they were late and how can we help that? You know, if it's a transportation thing or whatever it is. And then review the importance of showing up on time, and if they are early, what they can do during that time. So I'm sure you've heard this a million times, but in the performing arts, 20 minutes before call is considered early, 10 minutes before call is on time, arriving at the call time is unprofessional. And I'm not sure if I have the minutes exactly right, but you get the gist of the way people need to operate. I mean, you as the stage manager generally have to be there 30 minutes to 45 minutes before the call starts. Always remind performers to text you, the stage manager, if they think they're going to be late, even by 5 minutes. Text the stage manager, not somebody else, the stage manager. This is something that I got from another stage manager in regards to lateness. Dealing with lateness and how to deal with dancers in rehearsal. I have observed that sometimes the rules of rehearsal can be somewhat forgotten when dealing with dancers. Many choreographers create a very open environment and want dancers to express themselves in all ways, which is great, but sometimes this can happen to the detriment of the overall. If dancers are having personal issues, figure out a way the SM, the choreography SM, can inside of the rehearsal hall so the main rehearsal can continue. Choreographers themselves need to set a good example, and that is really huge for choreographers and directors. If they're even a minute late, it really sets up a bad, it's a bad situation, and it really reflects badly on the person. And I think it kind of reduces the respect that the performers have for the choreographer or the director. Okay, so moving on to budgets and meetings. We talk about production budgets in the production management class. So I'm not going to go over that. You have to take production management, which will be offered again in, who knows, because I know the curriculum has completely changed. Yeah. Normally it would be in June of 2019, but I'm not sure why. I'm not sure when it's being offered again. And the stage manager and the production manager are one and the same person. You are in charge of the production budget. When there's a separate stage manager, and for the stage manager, only need of money for the state and miscellaneous expenses, all of which must be approved by the PM or who's ever in charge of the budget. Don't spend money thinking you're going to get reimbursed unless it's been approved first. And obviously you have to keep original receipts and submit your receipts with a cover sheet itemizing all of the receipts and the total due to you. Lots of places will not reimburse you unless you have original receipts.
Can you repeat what the small items were?
Well, the stage manager is mostly for miscellaneous expenses and items for the stage manager kit. For instance, the stage manager for Three Sisters just asked me yesterday if we could purchase a certain kind of medicine for diabetics to when people go on or have low blood sugar. And she asked me if we could afford it so that they could go ahead and buy it. So that's all I wanted to say about it. As Lisa knows, we talked about it quite at length in the production management class. Okay, running meetings. You should have as many meetings as necessary. Staff, and they don't. Production, that would be at least once a week. For a lower tech dance concert, every 2 weeks would work. We have production meetings for the thesis concert starting 4 months in advance, every 2 weeks. And then when we get closer, they happen every week. So you kind of have to gauge how often you need to meet based on how complicated the production is. Less so for something like, more so for the thesis concert and less for, I don't even know what Cohort 5's concert is called in general terms, but it's lower tech, and so there's fewer reasons to have long production meetings.
And it would probably be, do you have, so we're performing at the mission, at the dance mission in January. Would you have more production meetings because it's in a different place than like here in the situation you're comfortable with? Or would you have more here because what we can do here with our own people is more than what we do with the dance mission? That makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think there'd be more necessarily because of the location, because you're always on tour. essentially. What was the second part you asked? If there were more just because
Well,
it's complicated?
Yeah, is it more, I guess I was asking about location. If you have your own home theater and then there's tour, is there more required because you're having to also adapt to the new environment and the new stage equipment and the lighting board and soundboard and all of that
Mhm.
could potentially come into play for organizational purposes when you're in a new location? Or would it be more because, like, for example, when you're on campus, there's a lot, because we know this theater, there's a lot more you could do for the dancers. So there would be more coordination in opening up the collaborative field to seeing how we could cater to the dancers.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the second reason, for sure. In terms of the complications of performing in a space that you not normally perform in, I think that kind of conversation doesn't necessarily need to take place in a production meeting involving everybody,
Got it,
because it's kind of a waste of time for the costume designer and that sort of thing.
got it. I
For
see.
instance, in the theater program, we have design meetings
Mm,
starting 6 months in advance, and then we start
Okay.
production meetings 4 months in advance. So
That's- I
you
see.
really only want to call the people who are being affected.
There's
Yeah.
a separate meeting for
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Got
Yeah.
it.
But then you as stage manager need to be sure that all of those people are aware of any limitations that might happen in that venue. A couple notes about running meetings. So yeah, I just mentioned how often they need to happen. Be sure to notify the meeting attendees 2 to 3 days before each meeting. Presumably all of these meetings will have already been listed on the block calendar, which they've all gotten at the first production meeting. So it's not really going to be a surprise to them that the production meeting is coming up. So it's more of a reminder. So what I do, we have weekly production meetings for Three Sisters right now. I remind people 3 days in advance when I send them the preliminary agenda and ask them if they have any items for the agenda. So it serves the purpose of reminding people, but also for you to develop a complete agenda that deals with every issue that needs to be dealt with. Agendas. So agendas should be as detailed as necessary. So I wanted to show you as an example, and this is also on Moodle. So this is the agenda that John McAfee created for one of the production meetings for Cohort 4's concert last summer, and it is incredibly detailed. Now, the main reason because of that is you only have 2 meetings when people are actually here, and you have to cover a whole lot of territory in each meeting. And these meetings are not an hour long, they're 90 minutes long. So it's just easier to have everything that you can think of because these questions need to be answered. The kind of agendas I set for Three Sisters are more general, and the department heads bring up their issues at the meeting. So it really depends on what, you have to take the circumstances into account when you are developing these agendas. One thing that's really good about having this kind of detailed production agenda is this becomes very easily turns into the production meeting notes. Somebody has to be taking notes during a production meeting, whether it's the stage manager or somebody else. And this practically is a production meeting notes. It's really kind of serving both purposes.
Can I comment?
Yeah.
Because I was there in those meetings, I can say too that, and I'm sure in part it's because it was so detailed, the meetings started and finished on time. And I just felt that there was so much information to cover, but we got through all of that. And I think part of that was the fact that both John and Katie were just ultra organized.
Mhm.
But also some of it, I think, was also just everyone in the room had to we had to stay on task. You know, you couldn't, like if we started to go off in one direction, then John would say, this is a discussion for another time,
Mhm.
or this is a discussion just for so-and-so over here. So anyway, that's just.
Yeah, that's actually what I wanted to talk about next.
Right.
That's absolutely true. Whoever running the meeting really needs to keep it on task. If people start joking with each other and having a laugh, you don't really want to say stop doing that so we can move on. But you have to keep your eye on the clock. So you can let people go off on a tangent for X amount of time, knowing that you have to pull it back so that you can complete the agenda. But you want the meeting to have an open and warm feeling. So you don't want it to be too austere and structured that way. The other thing is, in my opinion, that having a meeting that lasts longer than 90 minutes is completely ineffective. 60 minutes is better, but 90 minutes is the absolute and what you can have in the meeting. I guess if you have to go longer, then you need to take some kind of a break in between. But they're generally just really ineffective meetings if they go more than 90 minutes.
Do you think that's just that people just become weary? Or
Yeah, I think people's brains get tired and they have a hard time focusing. It's just like rehearsal. I mean, any becomes effective the longer it goes on. Like I'm sure you found in rehearsal that people's minds start to wander, or in your case, people's bodies give out after a certain amount of time. But yeah, you know, it's just the human condition that people are going to wander after a certain amount of time because it takes a lot of concentration to do that. We also talk about meetings a lot in the production management class, so I don't really want to go into more detail about that. But did anybody have any thoughts about meetings that you want to talk about?
Assistant production manager for 2 Jantrum shows ago, and Raleigh gave me some really great feedback on the format, similar to what John did. Having John's example in a centralized place for the MFA program, and I think would be great for future people who need to do notes as an example.
It is now. They have filed all the reports. I'm not sure where it is, but Rahelia told me that that's been
Terrific.
Well, an idea that popped up when you were talking, you said about the 90-minute retention thing, and I was thinking, oh yeah, but in workshops, like the longer it goes on, the deeper I get into the movement and understanding it.
Mhm.
And so just as like a question is like, how can we create and foster that kind of environment in that kind of meeting setting? Not because I want it to go on longer than an hour and a half, but the inclusivity part of that matters to me, like keeping the collaborative spirit and more that everyone's on the same page with one another as a we're doing it kind of thing, instead of I'm being like, moving out of lecture mode. It's
yeah.
just, like,
I mean, if you can
creating
find
that
somebody who's
contact.
extremely charismatic and has a lot of energy and is upbeat, you may be able to. But the people in these meetings generally aren't. I'm sure people believe part of their skills to be this meeting. So. Okay, property management. As the stage manager, you often supervise the use and storage of props during rehearsals and performances. If the dancers are capable of using props because they know their choreography well enough, then they should have the real thing or a rehearsal prop. There's really no point in giving somebody a prop while you're still teaching steps because it'll be more of a weight than anything else. So what is a rehearsal prop? So you all know what regular props are. A prop is a stand-in for the real thing. The prop may not want to give you the real thing because it's breakable or because it's not available, so they give you rehearsal. Other times they give you the actual prop because it can't be damaged and you might as well. It's easier for them and for you to have you found the right chair, then it can be broken. You have to be aware of which need to be stuff needs to be noted in rehearsal so that it can carry on into performances.
And budgeted.
Yeah. Question?
And budgeted. And like
So you can assume the father is a prop master. And, you know, there are lots of places where there's actually a prop master who runs the show, but I think that's a pretty sophisticated level. So at this point, you can assume the principles in rehearsal and performance. So once the player has made the props, they turn them over to you, and it's your responsibility to take care of them, to be sure that they're locked up in a safe space so they can't be lost and you'd have to reimburse somebody. That sometimes props are extremely fragile and they have to be taken care of really carefully. Stage manager, or that the prop master delivers the props, rehearsal props, or the actual props. So we have rehearsal props this Sunday night because they're doing the first run through of the play. Actors are off book, so they can all deal with props. The real thing are rehearsal props. So that's about the care and feeding of the props. In terms of tracking props, and this is really one of the hardest things to do in my experience. I'm not sure if it was in the book, in our book, that they talked about the fact that props are often an afterthought, and that it was somewhere else I was reading, but sometimes props are just forgotten about and they're like, oh, you go ahead and get this prop, that sort of thing. So obviously it's much better to have one person that's in charge of it. So in terms of tracking props, when you start rehearsal, you're going to have a list of what you think the props are from meeting with the choreographer, or if you've done a production analysis, if that's possible, like Swan Lakes. So you'd have that list. But all of those things are going to change radically during rehearsal. So the actual number of items, the designs of the come about in rehearsal, and that all needs to be tracked. And that's why now with the heavy prop show, we have a stage manager, that's all they do. And they will become the person who runs the props backstage.
You said
but it's
number of items, design.
Yeah, and details. So for instance, a chair, how many chairs do we need? what design? Is it supposed to be modern, or is it from to be a specific period? Details, what size is it? Does it somebody stand on it and dance? Every kind of detail that
Is
you
it
can think of, that's
painted?
exactly.
Yeah.
That's the stage manager's responsibility to track, because the prop person is not in that meeting.
Okay.
So in addition to the design and the details of the props, you also need to know who uses the prop, whether it's preset either on before a piece starts or at intermission or between pieces. And if it's not preset, where is it set off stage? Which wing is it set in? That sort of thing.
We didn't talk about in the tracking, and maybe you're getting to this, but when you borrow props, the book showed like a document that tracks the borrowing of props. Is that typically done by the prop master or by the stage manager?
It's generally done by the prop master. It's just something that would have to be defined for a stage manager. I mean, I would hope that they wouldn't assign the stage manager to do that, because you can see everything that the stage manager.
But
But
maybe
depending on the
stage
size of the
manager's
company,
job would be to make sure that that form, whatever the company's form is for that, is delivered to the prop master so that that's their responsibility.
so that the forms they use in the book would really, the prop master would
Okay.
use them. Whether they're renting out props to another company or you're renting props from another company, they fill out the form. So I'm not really going to go
Okay.
into details of
Great.
that.
That was just the question. Thank you.
But I think in any situation, the stage manager is responsible to know everything there is to know about,
Got it.
but not necessarily the person who go out and get that prop. And information about props is communicated through rehearsal reports. I think when a show is complicated, then you need to schedule a special prop meeting. Since I've been here as production manager, I discovered that a lot of stuff was getting lost in the process. Standardly, like 3 weeks into rehearsal, have a prop meeting to go over the prop list with everybody that's involved. So large enough to have a scenic designer. The scenic designer is in fact in charge of the design of the larger props. They would be the person who would pick the design of probably any piece of furniture, and then the prop master would go out and find examples of things and show it to the scenic designer. Things like hand props, the scenic designer doesn't need to get involved with so much. Rehearsals. If you're rehearsing with the props, you have to be sure that 15 minutes before the start of any given scene, you have set up the props, whether on stage or off stage. And you should always sit down with the cast and talk about the care and feeding of props and their responsibility when it comes to props. Generally, in all performances, the stage manager is in charge of the whole thing. The backstage manager in ASM may be in charge of setting the props, but the stage manager then, walks through to be sure it's done. It's the performer's responsibility to be sure their props are there. They need to go and be sure their props are on the prop table. It is their responsibility. The bottom line is that the falls on 3 people: the performer, the backstage manager who is ever running the props, or the stage manager. and the stage manager, I should say.
Is the backstage manager also called an assistant stage manager? Are those terms kind of interchangeable?
It depends on the situation. They would have different union. The stage manager would be doing something completely different. So there's not really one good word that describes it. Yeah, it can be production assistant. It can be any number of people.
And would a crew member ever be involved with helping set
Oh,
up?
yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah. For instance, with Three Sisters, there's 2 assistant stage managers backstage supervising the props. And then there are 3 other crew members involved with the props, completely separate from
Wow.
the wardrobe crew, doing all the quick changes in addition to getting people ready to go on stage. So when you're setting up for techs and dresses and performances, for the offstage prop tables, and in the situations that I've worked on, those prop tables are covered with craft paper, and there's a diagram of where all the props go, and the name of that prop. So much ease setting the props. And we're going to be talking about scene shifts later on, but then there's also diagrams of the way where the props are on the stage. Performance and this stunning list. So for instance, and this could happen in dance very easily. So if the crew's called and they cut up, or just the stage manager, and they set up for the show. Then the dancers come and they do the warm-up. Those props can get moved easily during the warm-up, and it all needs to be checked. So anytime the stage is being used for anything other than set up for the show, whether it be a warm-up for dancers or singers or a fight call, you then have to go and check again, particularly the props that are on the stage, but probably all the props to be sure that they're all there in the right place. There are particular props that require special handling and permits, most obviously firearms. Generally, firearms in performing arts are rented from specialized in those. We're talking about firearms that actually can shoot blanks. And they're very strict rules about how they're treated. I think they listed in the book the equity rules for it. But I think for our purposes, firearms always have to be locked up until the moment they're used, and then they have to be immediately locked up afterwards. And most importantly, this applies to every prop, but you need to be sure that nobody touches them other than the person who's actually using them. And anytime there are firearms in a production, most likely it involves some sort of a fight or a shootout. And so you have to have fight rehearsals. When there's swords or guns or even a fist fight, you have to have a fight rehearsal to rehearse that over and over again for safety reasons. The other things that are specialized are candles, anything that involves a flame. We here, Becca has checked it out with the fire department. We now can bring a single candle lit on stage as long as there are fire extinguishers. I think, these kinds of fudge, maybe 3 candles. Other than that, we have to mix them with fake candles.
That's fair.
Can I actually use real candles?
She had 3 actually.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if that's legal. So beyond having fire extinguishers at a place like the Met, they have somebody from the fire department who's actually on staff all the time. I don't know who pays them, the fire department or the Met. But in all theaters, if the certain level of the pyrotechnics gets to a certain level, they require having somebody from the fire department there. In addition to all the things that have to be done with the scenery, there has to be a fire curtain. A fire curtain is a curtain that separates the stage from the audience. That's fireproof. Generally, we don't do this here, but it's kind of illegal. All scenery is supposed to be fireproof. So after it's built, it needs to be sprayed with fireproofing, or it needs to be built out of fireproof fabric or lumber. So yeah, that's another thing that's complicated. Snow cradles, and we talked about a little bit, snow, feathers, rose petals, anything that requires generally a snow cradle. Besides, was it in this book you talked about the Mark Morris throwing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The snow machine and the gobo. Snow gobo.
Yeah, snow gobo. No way that's ever going to work. I have never worked in a theater that's big enough to have a snow machine or even a rain machine, but I know that involves a certain part of the stage being a trough with drains in it. And you just need to remember as a stage manager that these snow cradles need to be refilled before every performance, which requires a ladder or a genie and somebody who feels comfortable going up on it and doing that. And that can be a member of the prop crew or a member of the lighting crew or a member of any crew who feels comfortable going up there, because sometimes you carry. About props you want to talk about? I'm thinking about props that I've seen used with mid-sized company. There can be a lot of props that are electrified that use batteries, I've noticed. So that's, you need to be sure that you have your good supply of batteries and it's budgeted. Like when we do a musical, we use $300 of batteries during the course of running a musical. So that's sound, not props, but that's the kind of thing. Have you ever worked with props in any pieces that you've done?
I was a small role in a piece that was, I guess you consider this site specific. Because the dancer was inside and then we eventually went outside, and there were windows here. And so she actually performed facing the audience from outside, like looking in. And so I was the person, so the shades were down, and then she would appear, and I would, I just had to pull, and they were old blinds. So like some of them worked really well, and I think there were 4 or 5 of them. And it would get, so like every day, you perform this. I mean, it's a problem. It wasn't anything that had to be set, except the shades had to be drawn down.
When I'm talking about props, I'm also talking about scenery here. I just didn't want to get into scenery because it's, we don't usually have it. We have set pieces.
So I'm glad we're talking about it. When a prop can become a set piece or part of the dance and then becomes a prop again.
So describe what that is.
So I'm playing with an idea in order to relationships with the use of a parachute.
Mm-hmm.
And once it be raised up or pulled back or something, and so then it stops becoming a prop that the dancers are using that piece, and then will become a prop again. So just like the coordination when that happens and where it's placed and whose role and responsibility shifts within the duration. And I was going to ask the question Andrea's piece because that's an example of it. So that was a set piece, but then it became
rigging, yeah.
Direction.
I think these things, there are lots of things like that, and you just have to define it. As stage manager, so say specifically with Andrea's piece, Beckett actually did the rigging for the piece with John. I'm not sure who did what. But then once it's set and done, you as the stage manager are in charge that it's set, Is it in the right position before the piece to be lowered to the stage, just like with the parachute? Is it set? Yeah, there's no one right answer. Just like on rehearsal reports, when there's things that fall into two different, from departments, you just have to define that. But yeah, as stage manager, once you get into text, you're the person in charge of, just like you're the person in charge of getting snow into the snow cradle, no matter who's doing it. Even if Beckett rigged the snow cradle, he's not going to come to every performance to put snow in. So yeah, it just needs to be defined. We have these things all the time. Yeah. And things like costumes, sometimes it's the backstage crew that's in charge of quick changes, and sometimes it's the wardrobe crew. So it just needs to be defined. And I don't know in a big theater how that works in the ballet, who's in charge of quick changes. I would imagine it's the wardrobe, because of the wardrobe union probably requires that. I should make, because we're probably not going to discuss that, just a note about quick changes. So you need to be sure as stage manager that is a quick change is any costume changed outside of the dressing room, I guess would be the answer. Usually for the reason that the performer does not have enough time to get to the dressing room to dress and come back. So stage managers need to be sure that there are quick change booths. Here, that usually involves a screen, some sort of a clothing rack, kind of light, and if we can provide it, a mirror. So those are kind of the basics. And then you have to agree with everybody who's working about where it can go. I mean, we're having, in this production of Three Sisters that takes place on stage, the lobby is in what is now the stage right wing. For that show, it's the stage left wing. So the audience is the performers, which is horrible. It's just something that needs to be. So they, the audience is going to come in, is going to have, they probably have the prop table set and covered with cloth and behind a screen, but then they have to be sure that's all taken care of once the show gets going. But yeah, quick change booths are the responsibility ultimately of the stage manager. And you need to check in the modesty of people. Most performers don't really care about modesty. You need to check in with them if you're tight for space. You always have to deal with modesty if you're dealing with a child. Whether they're modest or not, you have to give them private space to see. And, and for their betterment too. But otherwise, a lot of men and women are happy to strip down to nothing to do a costume change. It's just the way of the world. But there are some people who are very modest, so another thing to check on a quick change area, which isn't going to have 4 walls around it.
It was something that was not considered when I was doing this. I remember it like there's 2 most shocking things about the first time I went to New York City. And the first was going to take class at Steps on Broadway. And after class, all of the women just like getting naked in front of me. And I was like a kid and had not ever seen other naked people. And now it was a bunch of them. And it's like how they conducted themselves in it told important. But it was also like the first time experience, and I wish that the teachers that were taking us there would have been aware that that would have been potential and kind of warned us.
Mhm.
And the second was watching Les Mis, and I had never seen a same-sex couple be physical in public. And I was more fascinated by watching them in front of me than I was even watching the performance, because I had never seen this interaction before. It just like wasn't in my consciousness. It's not what I grew up with. So those kinds of things that I feel are so valuable. Of course, I'm a teacher now, so I'm like in tune to them.
But that's a really good thing for stage managers to know, to think about
Yeah,
the individuals in the company and are they going to be affected by certain kind of activity.
it's
That's
an area of
diverse.
concern for me because I'm in child. So I was asking questions and looking around when Taylor student.
They had everybody in that cast had their own dressing room.
Yeah.
They were in.
They were in here. The rest of the
And we
cast
all-
was in the other.
What did the men do? Didn't you learn from that? You guys?
I think they were in that piece. Were there guys in
Maybe
the
they
other
were just
pieces?
before they got here.
So, but
Or they were could
But
have
the
been their
young
big brother.
girl and the other female dancers,
They're all here.
and when the mother,
Yes.
yeah, they were all in here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that we weren't allowed to come in here, the other dancers that we are, but we just were respectful of.
My first professional gig was my internship from college, and I was at a regional theater, McCarter Theater in Princeton, and they had a repertory company, but they also, people came in on tour. And so Alvin Ailey came to perform that, and I can't remember what I was doing. It's probably running the flies, and the dancers would come running off stage, and I thought they were dying because they were hyperventilating so much. That combined with the fact that dancers smoke, in those days, all dancers smoked. Like, those are my biggest shocks that I get from.
yeah,
That still slays me.
Yeah.
I'm like struggling as it is.
Okay, I think that's it for today. Hopefully, we will be on Zoom next week.
I thought we were going over the glossary today. Is that
Over the what?
the glossary? Maybe it was.
Oh, yeah, it was on there. If you have any questions about those things, just,
I
you
don't
can bring
think
them.
So I just really valued, I guess, being in the physical space and going through the how you described them was, for some of them, most of them I already know, but some of them was just like I needed to see the item. So other than that, none of that stands out. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything in this that was important from you for us to know, particularly pertaining to a quiz, since we don't
Yeah.
we don't know yet, right, what's on the quiz. I just want
Yeah.
to make sure that
Yeah, I'm not going to ask anything that's,
tricky.
yeah, something that's not, that you wouldn't use very much. I'm not going to ask you about stage screws because I didn't show you one and we don't use them here.
Okay.
But I probably will ask you about legs and borders, which affect dancers a lot.
So that.
And I know I will be asking you questions about who does what in the company, like company manager, tech director.
Did that, you never got that video? Okay, so I'll just have to maybe,
You can look at it on my phone.
okay.
Clearly, I'm having all kinds of video problems